All right, hey everybody, Evan here from devascend.com, and in this video we're going to cover the Vue JS basics. So in the last video, if you haven't seen it, we set up a project here, basically go over how to get everything set up here and what you're going to need. You're going to need to make sure you have the Vue script, and here you can see we're importing our app.js that we just created. But now in this app.js file, we're actually going to remove our console log and we're going to get started actually creating the Vue app. So in order to create a Vue app, it's pretty simple. We're going to create a const. You can call this const whatever you want. I'm going to name it app just so it's clear. And we're going to set that equal to Vue, which remember we imported right here with a script tag here. And then we're going to access the create app method. And now here we basically created our app, but now we need to actually mount our app so that we can modify our actual HTML DOM here. I'm going to go ahead and type app.mount, and we're going to need to pass in a div. So I'm going to go ahead and create that div right now, and I'm going to give it the ID of app. Again, you can name this whatever you want. I'm going to name it app, and all we have to do is put quotes, and we need to select our app. And basically what this does is it tells Vue that this is the part of our app that we want to have modifiable, meaning that Vue is only going to be able to access and modify only the contents within inside this div. So it's not going to be able to access this h1 tag. It won't be able to access a p tag like this, but we can access everything within our app element here because again, we are mounting it to that specific ID. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that, and we're going to now add in our first variable. So I'm going to call this variable fruit. Go ahead and save that. Now we're going to go to our create app method here. And inside this, we're going to put an object. And inside our object, we're going to have a property. This property is going to be a data function. And we're going to return an object. And in this object, we're going to have fruit. And I'm just going to say apple. Now I'm going to go ahead and save that. And now let's talk about what this actually is. So this is the fruit variable that we just created right here inside of our data function that we're passing into our create app here. The data function is returning an object with a property of fruit, and we can actually access this variable or this property by going into our DOM by using a two curly brace enclosure, signifying to Vue that we want to actually have this be a variable that we're accessing in our app. So if we go ahead and save this and we go to our live server, which again, you can just click go live at the bottom right here, or you can right click and click open with live server. And so now if we go to our browser, make this a little bit bigger, you can see now we have apple, which is our fruit variable that we're accessing right here. And just to show you an example of how we can't modify anything outside of our app div here, I'm going to place that same variable outside of our div. I'm going to go ahead and save that. And if we go back to our browser, you can see now it shows up as what we typed out instead of the actual variable, which is apple, because again, Vue can only modify the div that we are mounting to. So you can't use variables and stuff outside of our div that we have mounted to Vue.js. Okay, so let's go ahead and add another variable. I'm going to call this variable amount, and we're just going to set it to 1 by default. And so now here after our variable, I'm going to type a comma, and then I'm going to add another variable, and this is going to be amount, which is the data property that we have on the object we're returning here. And so now if I go ahead and save this and we go back to our live server, you're going to see apple 1. So again, you can have anything you want between these two variables here. You can have a dash, you can have an equal sign. It doesn't matter. It's simply whatever text you want. It's just inserting the variable into the text. So that's pretty straightforward. All right, so now say we want to create a button that increases the amount variable here by 1 every time we click on it. Well, there's multiple ways we can do this, but first I'm going to enclose this, our fruit and our amount, in a div here, and I'm going to re-add the comma. And now we're going to add another div below this, and inside this div we're going to put a button. We're going to call this button increase. And now in order to make this button actually increase the amount, we're going to need to use something in Vue called a directive. And basically the way we can use a directive is by typing Vue-on: click, and then we're going to set equal to quotes here. And so basically the V v-on is the directive in this case, and the :click here is actually the name of the event, which in this case is a click event. So this is going to fire every time we click on the increase button here, but it's not actually going to do anything because we need to pass in some JavaScript into the quotes. Now it's kind of weird to think about the fact that we're passing in JavaScript in quotes, but it should hopefully make sense after I show you an example. So I'm going to type in amount, and then I'm going to type in ++, which is the JavaScript way of increasing something by 1. And so now if I go ahead and save this and we go back to our browser, I can click on the increase button here, and you'll notice that it changed to 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 every time I click on it. Again, that is because this is actually JavaScript. It's not just text, it's actual JavaScript that runs when the click event is fired. So just like we have this increase button, we can also have maybe a decrease button, and we can say amount minus, which again in JavaScript just decreases a variable by 1. And now if we click on decrease, you'll see it change from 0, or it changed from 1 to 0. If we hit increase, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And so as you can see, we can click on whatever and it will increase or decrease accordingly. Now let's say I wanted to create a button that changes the name of this fruit. Well, let's create a button. We can do v-on click, and we're going to set this equal to fruit equals banana, and I'm going to call this button change fruit. And now if we go ahead and click on this change fruit button, it's going to change it from apple to banana, because once again we're using JavaScript here to reassign the variable fruit to banana. And just to clarify with this v-on click here, this doesn't need to be a button. It could be any div or element you want. So we could just have a plain old div and say change fruit, and we can do v-on click, and we could have this be fruit equals orange. And so now when we click on this div here, even though it's not a button, we click on this div, it's going to change the name to orange. So these directives work on any element, not just buttons. And there's actually a shorthand way to type these out. So instead of doing v-on click, we can actually replace the v-on with an @ symbol. And this @ symbol is basically a shorthand way of just typing v-on. So you can just use an @ symbol. And if we go ahead and save that, we'll notice that it works exactly the same as it did before. All right, let's do something a little bit more complex with this. So now we're going to have this event here, call a method. So let's say we want to make this function change fruit. So in our app.js, we actually don't have that change fruit method created. So to create that method, we actually have to add in another property in our create app here, and that's going to be called methods. Inside our methods is where we're going to store all of our methods. So I believe we named that function change fruit. So let's go ahead and create a change fruit method here. And basically we're just going to change this fruit here to be something different. So we're going to say this dot fruit equals, and let's just say grape. So now whenever we click on change fruit here, this change fruit div, it's going to invoke this change fruit method, and notice we don't need to have the parentheses here. It will automatically know to invoke this function once we click on it. And now if we go to our browser and we click on change fruit, it's going to change it to grape. Now say we want to pass in a specific fruit, all we have to do is add the parentheses, and in here is where we can actually put what fruit we want to change it to. So I can type blueberry, and we have to make sure we put our parameter inside our change fruit method. So I'm just going to call this parameter fruit name, and we're going to replace grape with fruit name. So now when we click on this div, it's going to invoke the change fruit method. It's going to pass in blueberry, which is our fruit name parameter, and then it's going to set our fruit property here to the fruit name that we passed in, which in this case is blueberry. So let's go ahead and try and make sure that works. I'm going to go ahead and click on change fruit here, and you're going to see that it changed to blueberry. All right, so the last thing I want to cover is conditional rendering. So you'll notice we house all our modifier buttons here inside of this div. Say we wanted to show and hide all these modifiers. Well, we can do that by using a directive called v-if, and we can set it equal to our conditional. So again, if you know JavaScript, you know that things are either truthy or falsy. So if we were to set this to just be true, and we go to our browser, you'll see that we can still see it here. And if we were to set this to false, it would be hidden. And of course, if we set 1 is that exactly equal to 1, which is true, we can see it. And if we set 1, if we say 1 is exactly equal to 2, which is false, it's going to hide it. So let's just create a variable called show buttons. And we can say show buttons is exactly equal to true. However, we can just do the shorthand by just saying show buttons to check if this variable is true or false. Now let's go ahead and create that variable because we don't have it yet. And we're going to set it to, let's set it to false by default. Now we're going to want to create a method that's going to toggle our show buttons here. So to do that, we just go in our methods here and we're going to make a new method called toggle buttons. And inside here, we're going to say this.showButtons, and we're going to set it equal to not this.showButtons. And basically by doing this, we're essentially saying set this equal to the not of whatever it is, which means if it's false, we're going to set it to true. And if it is true, we're going to set it to false. That is all that this does. I'm going to go ahead and save that. And now if we go to, let's just put this button under this div here. So we're going to say toggle buttons, and we're going to use the Vue directive click event. And here's where we're going to actually call that toggle buttons method that we just created. So I'm going to pass in toggle buttons. Again, we don't need the parameters. It'll automatically know to invoke that method. And now let's just review over what we did just so you understand. So we're saying only show the contents of this div if show buttons is true, which is the variable we created here in our data. And when we click on this button, it's going to fire the click event, which toggles the toggle button method here. And it's going to toggle our show buttons to be true and false. So let's go ahead and look at our browser. And as you can see, we don't see any other button except for toggle buttons. If we click on this, now we can see our other buttons. And if we go ahead and click on toggle buttons again, it's going to hide it. So that is how you do conditional rendering inside of Vue. So that's going to cover the basics. In the next video, we're going to actually look at the Vue CLI and learn how to create a full-on Vue app, which kind of sounds jarring, but actually it's very easy. And I'll show you why you want to use the Vue CLI if you're making a full-fledged Vue project. But for now, that's going to do it for this video. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.